My name is Grady Scott with Low Key Music Entertainment. We're on a mission to build a community of musicians one note at a time. This video is a brief walkthrough of an article we have on our site. We touched on the topic of producers using Midi, and you can see the link to the article in the description below. Now let's go ahead and get started. Here's a song that was cut using Midi. The program that we used was Pro Tools, but the method and the things that you can do with Midi are pretty much universal. Let's go ahead and take a listen to the song, keeping in mind that this is practically a rough cut, so the timing's going to be raw and some of the notes may be out of place. But you'll see using Midi, you can correct timing, bad notes, and more simply by shifting them. Let's go ahead and take a quick listen to it. Let's go ahead and stop it here. Now, as you could tell by hearing and by seeing some of the lines, even now, that the timing is off in many places, and that's really advantageous to the MIDI user because they're really easy to fix. They can be time consuming. If you, the more polished that you're looking to make it sound, the more time you'll probably need to spend making adjustments to it. So let's start with MIDI. MIDI notes are really data points. This data is stored as events. Things such as notes, pitch, velocity, duration, and more are all controlled by MIDI, and therefore you can edit them. Now again, these show up as blobs. These events show up as blobs, which you can move either left or right, up or down. When you move the pitch or the events up and down, you change the pitch. When you move the event left or right, you change the pitch. So again, up and down you change the pitch. Left and right, you change the timing. All right, so using the piano roll, which is on the left, let's make this larger so we can all see it. We can correct notes that we actually should have played, but we missed by maybe a note or so. But first, let's look at controlling the timing, because that's one thing that really stands out a lot. Let's start with the drum track. Now we use a mask function to edit the MIDI events, and that function is called quantizing. Not a lot of people understand quantizing, so let's break down what it does and some of the pitfalls to avoid. The first thing to note, or the first thing that the quantize function is going to ask you for, is what am I quantizing, and how long, or what notes, or essentially what grid are we going to use to do that. Now, as you can see here, we have a full bar quantize grid. Now, if I was to quantize on that, set the quantize grid, same as this grid, to be one measure or a whole note, you see that all the events got shifted to this bar or this bar. Here's where you can actually undo a great take. So in order to set up a grid properly, you should note what type of notes you're playing inside there, the timing of them or the rhythm. For example, if we know that we're playing quarter notes or eighth notes, or even 16th notes, it doesn't make sense for us to use a larger quantized scale or grid. If we're playing 16th notes, let me see, 1, 2, this looks like it has eighth notes in it. It does. So if my smallest passage is eighth notes, it really doesn't make sense for me to quantize using anything smaller. Let's make this bigger so we can see it. Because when we do, the notes get shifted to the nearest grid. So this would probably get shifted over here. And here it's fine, but right here, it wouldn't be fine. So let's go back to 16ths and let's see what 16ths sound like. Notice that the crash didn't move to here. The crash is still off. And that's a point I want to make about quantizing your events. It's not an end all be all. All right, like you'll have to play it back. It'll correct a lot of the mistakes. It'll nudge the notes slightly to where they should be, but it's not perfect. Because we set the grid to 16th notes, when we did quantize the drum track, this must have been somewhere in between this bar and there. So it moved it to the nearest bar. You can fix that. That's why I love Midi. Just shift it over. In fact, let's do that on a whole note scale. There. Now let's take a listen to it. Now by me clicking on the note here, it highlighted every Midi event that took place on that line. And it's a crash, so I'm more than certain it came in on a downbeat. So let's go ahead and take a listen to what it sounds like now. Aha, I have a crash that's out of place, and the great thing about Midi is you can grab it and move it to where it needs to be. Now that guitar click sounds out of place, so let's see if we can fix that. Let's see, looking at the grid, which is already at a 16th, we could tell a lot of these should be there. One of the things I like to do with Midi is place a note to the nearest downbeat after you selected them all, and that might clean it up there. What do you know? It actually worked. But the strings are still off. Now, again, these are really just examples of how you could use music or Midi. You'll definitely develop your own workflow, and I encourage you to practice messing with Midi to the point and learning Midi so that you can get a grasp on it, and you'll see that it's a very reliable tool. What I like to do in Midi is search for the passage that has the smallest rhythm in it. So if I know I'm playing 16th notes, hey, I know I got to set my grid to a 16th note grid. So what I do is look for a small passage, and this looks like it would be it. Yeah, because they repeat themselves. So this small pattern right here would be the smallest. So if I set a grid that would contain both of these, I'm good to go. Let's try this trick first. Let's select them all. Move them to a downbeat. Now you see that some of the, even though I shifted the notes to the nearest or to the first downbeat, some of them are still off. And that's not a problem. Now that I actually did that, it has a better chance of being recognized in the pattern. Meaning, because I shifted them as a whole unit, the quantized grid is going to be more effective. So let's go ahead and quantize these. And there it is. Now every note will be lined up. Let's see if we can clean up that brass, and then we'll be good to go. Now again, this isn't an end-all be-all. It's not really a fix it in the mix and it's gonna turn out great. Really, using MIDI, what I like to do using MIDI is just use it as a rough draft, because there's so much that you can do in here, and we're just really showing the tip of the iceberg. Let's see if we can control that. Now let's play through it. Now, prior to MIDI, when you record it into, say, an analog recorder or your tape deck or whichever device you were using, you were stuck to an instrument. Once you put it on wax, it stayed on wax. You couldn't change the instrument no matter how much you wanted to. The great thing about MIDI is I can change the instrument before I even lay it down to wax. For example, let's look at this brass line. And I can change it really to anything I want. So, and where I was controlling it was from the Triton Extreme, which is being the MIDI controller, or serving as a MIDI controller, which is where I'm getting my instruments from. Another place, great place, is virtual instruments. Instruments such as Native. Native has some great sounding B4 organs. Let's be real. You really can't carry a Hammond organ everywhere, and it's nice to have a Hammond sounding organ, and that program to me is one that nailed it. IK Multimedia Sample Tank is another great one. There are so many that are out there that are just phenomenal. And we'll touch more in depth in using virtual instruments in later videos.